Hey everyone, and welcome back to Northwest Small Batch Brewing. I am, as always, Stephen, and welcome. I hope you're having a great day, and welcome to the channel. If you're new here, before I get started, I encourage you to take a look around, and if you like what you see, hit the like button. It really helps get my videos found on YouTube in the searches, and if you hit the subscribe button, you'll be notified every time I put out a new video. So, today I want to make a real short video, and this is more food for thought than really like brewing specific, but I want to talk about, well, first of all, don't kill me about this pronunciation. I think it's Reinheitsgebot.
Reinheitsgebot.
Anyway, I will promise to try to not say that again. Let's just call it in English the German purity laws, or the German beer purity law. I want to talk a little bit about that and maybe how it could be used in your brewing. So, I mean, it's really well known that German beer, I mean, let's be honest, Bavarian beer is like some of the best beer out there. Aww. But it's also, if you like lagers, I mean, it's not the only place that makes good beers, but it's well known. It's kind of like, here's how I see it. You know, whiskey sort of originated in Scotland. And so there'll always be a really strong, rich history of whiskey in Scotland.
But if I ever see you nosing it like this, I'll kill you. So first of all, what I want you to do, swirl the whiskey around, take it up and say, hello. Then you go back to it and say, how are you? Do it slowly. Then you come back and say, quite well, thank you very much.
And beer kind of made its big explosion in Germany. I mean, that's really, the Germans didn't necessarily invent beer, but it's really where you could call it the birthplace of beer. So let's go back a little bit. So before Germany was Germany, you know, we had Bavaria, which is just a bunch of different regions that we now call, you know, Germany. So a long time ago, you know, we know that beer has a very long history, and originally was made by monks in like monasteries and such. And so eventually the rulers, right, of each region within Bavaria said, you know, well, we want to make our own beer. You know, our court wants to have its own beer. We don't want to have to go to the monks, you know, and drink their beer. We want to do it ourselves. So they started doing that, but it wasn't so good. It wasn't nearly as good as what the monks were making. Of course, the monks had, you know, thousands of years of experience making their beer, so it makes sense they would make it better. But one of the problems was the ingredients people were using. So Bavaria, you know, Germany now, said, well, look, there were a lot of people putting ingredients that were used primarily in pagan festivals or practices or whatever. For example, belladonna root. Hello, belladonna root is deadly nightshade. I don't want that in my beer, thank you. And they'd use things like, oh, let's see, I wrote it down, I'm trying to think the name of, I think it's wormwood, right? Wormwood, which is what's used in, there's a drink, like a spirit that's made mostly in Louisiana called absinthe. It's like a green looking spirit that tastes nasty. It's like a bitter licorice flavor. Anyway, one of the original ingredients that's no longer used for that is wormwood, and wormwood was something they were using initially to make beer. Wormwood causes hallucination, and I don't know if it has other medical, you know, connotations, you know, problems that it can cause, but as you can see, Germany had to come up with, you know, some rules, because these ingredients, you know, if they weren't regulated, would obviously cause problems. So They made a law that dates back to 1516. That's a long time ago. And they claim officially, and I think it's probably true, that this is the oldest law in the world that is still in effect, is this German purity law, or German beer purity law. So basically the original law said, well, here, I'll tell you what the law said and then I'll back up. So the law said that beer could only be made with water, barley, and hops. So the first reason for making this rule was because we wanted to make sure the ingredients were safe and made consistent beer. There's another reason they believe this law was put in place. Back in those days, unlike today, grain was not as easily accessible and plentiful. And bread was a staple, right? Just like we have, I mean, it's still a staple today, just like eggs, milk, bread. So it would have been a problem if everybody started making beer from different grains, and now all of a sudden you didn't have enough grain to make bread, and so there was nothing to eat. So they had to make a law that said, hey, you know, you cannot use anything but barley. You can use barley to make your beer. Everything else, that's for bread. Wheat, you know, rye, all the other grains, those are reserved for making bread. So that's the other reason for the law, is to make sure that there was always enough, you know, bread to eat. So, I mean, things have changed a little bit. By the way, also, before it slips my mind, there's one other reason for the law that they created, which was to regulate the price of beer. Well, that was within, not for the law, but that was something that was part of the law, was regulating a price so that, you know, people couldn't price gouge you. So, what was the punishment for breaking the law? What if you made beer with something other than those ingredients, or you charged more than you were allowed to charge? My understanding is it wasn't really that harsh. I guess it depends on how you look at it, but basically they would just confiscate all your beer. So there you go. All right, so things have changed, right? Things have progressed over the years. Some of the reasons for having that law are no longer necessary, right? Grain is more plentiful. I don't think we're at risk of missing out on bread because we don't have enough grains. So they have changed the law. It's no longer just barley. It should just say now any kind of malted grain. So beer can now be made with malted grain, water, and hops. Now they added yeast at a later date to that law. The reason being is back in 1516, they didn't really know about yeast. They knew there was something, right, that happened when they were making the beer. Probably what they were doing, if you want a little short explanation, probably what would happen is they would make a batch of beer, and when it turned out good, they knew that maybe that wooden mash paddle they were using to stir it always created good beer, or something they threw in, you know, like that. And so they would always use that throughout the centuries. They would keep that same mash paddle or whatever it was, and they would always use that to make that batch of beer because it had a strain of yeast on it that probably has now been cultivated. But at the time, they didn't know that that was the issue. They probably just thought, you need this particular mash paddle to make this beer, and you can't do it without it. The reality is, of course, we know today it just has some kind of yeast on that paddle that stayed on it. And so every time they made the beer, that paddle was putting that yeast in there and creating the same beer every time. So today, of course, yeast is part of that law, but in the past it wasn't, only because they didn't really know about it. So things have changed current day. As I said, you can now use any malted grain. It does not have to be barley. There are also a lot of exceptions. When you hear somebody say the German purity beer law, it makes you think that every single beer in Germany has to be made with only those ingredients. That's it. That's not true. All right, that's not true. There are lots of exceptions these days. For example, if a beer is being exported out of Germany, doesn't have to use that law. If you want to make like a gluten-free beer, doesn't have to use that law. There's a lot of, if you make an ale, doesn't have to follow that law. This is primarily for lagers, and reality is it's not really a law anymore. If you want to make a beer in Germany that has that, follows that law, a lot of times you'll see on beers they put on the label, it'll say, I said I wasn't going to say it again, but it'll say on the label, Reinheitsgebot.
Reinheitsgebot.
Right? This German purity, that it meets that German purity law. So if you see that on the label, then you know that it was only made with those 4 ingredients and nothing else. And it's sort of a marketing ploy because they know that some people specifically want beer made just with those ingredients. They want a really simple, pure, they want to know exactly what's in their beer. And so they know that they'll sell more if they have that on the label. But, if you're making a traditional German lager, it is most likely going to follow those purity laws. So, I guess the question today is, do we really need the law? Does it matter? I mean, obviously, no other country has that sort of law. I mean, we make all kinds of weird beers here in the United States, and I'm sure other countries. We add different kinds of fruits and flavorings and vegetables and chocolate and, you name it, you can throw it in a beer, right? You can make chili, spicy beer. I mean, you name it, it can be made. But of course, it does not meet the requirements of the German purity law, the beer purity law. Here's how I think this sort of sets into things. I think it is historical. I think the main reason that the law still exists is because it is historical and cultural, And I do think there is some benefit to making a beer in that style. Number one is you have no preservatives, nothing in it that's known to cause cancer and, artificial ingredients. It's all natural. I love that. It's how I try to stick with my beers. I try to never put anything chemically in it. I mean, why would I? I mean, if you don't have to, why would you do that? So I love that about it. Also, if you're trying to make a beer and you just want to know that style of beer, right? You want to know how it should taste, or you want to make it in the most purest, way you can, make it in the style of the German beer purity laws. If you're going to make some kind of lager, maybe you're going to make a Doppelbock, right? Then make it with yeast, your malted grain, water, and hops, right? And then maybe down the road, you might go, gee, that would taste really good if it just had a hint of this flavor or that. And you can then make adjustments if you want, and try it again, making it a little differently. But there is something I think to be said, making it like at a very basic level just to see how it tastes. And that doesn't mean it's going to be bad or it's going to be simple. I did a series not too long ago, if you look through my videos, of 4 different smash beers where I just took a base malt and a single kind of hop and made a beer out of each one of them, because I wanted to be able to taste each one of the base grains to see what it was imparting on my beers that I made. So, and it was interesting. There were several base grains that I didn't really care for, So it was an interesting experiment. And also, it'll be interesting to see if the type of yeast you use makes a difference in that sense. But the point is, just making a beer at a real basic level like that, I think can give you it gives you a starting point, to say, this is where that style starts. Where can we go from there? And I think that's what this German beer purity law does. So anyway, that's just a small summary of that topic. I encourage you to, do a little research and check it out. And you know, try some German beers if you haven't. In the meantime, make sure you hit subscribe so you can see when my next video is going to come out. And I will see you in about a week with something else that's new. And until next time, keep on brewing.